The Holocaust Museum is scolding Governor Tim Walz after he referenced Anne Frank while discussing ICE operations in the state of Minnesota.
During his press conference on Sunday, the governor compared the story of Anne Frank to children of Minnesota who he says are hiding from ICE agents. Let's watch.
We have got children in Minnesota hiding in their houses, afraid to go outside. Many of us grew up reading that story of Anne Frank. Somebody's going to write that children's story about Minnesota.
Walz continued by once again urging President Trump to remove immigration agents from the state, suggesting that he is the only one with the power to bring the turmoil and violence to an end. However, the governor's comments were not received well by the U.S. Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. The museum's X account put out a statement saying, quote, Anne Frank was targeted and murdered solely because she was Jewish. Leaders making false equivalencies to her experience for political purposes is never acceptable. Despite tensions in Minneapolis, exploiting the Holocaust is deeply offensive, especially as anti-Semitism surges.
Online, other people also ripped the governor, calling the comparison insensitive. Writer Alex Zeldin says, you can talk about the state wrongfully executing Americans exercising their First Amendment rights without invoking the Holocaust. Our dead relatives are not your political prop. Please find another metaphor.
However, there was another side to the conversation, with some defending Walz and taking issue with the Holocaust Museum statement. Content creator and producer Jeremy Hecht writes, quote, growing up Jewish, I was taught my whole life to never forget. It's crazy how some people think that only applied to us and not every tragedy going on in the world.
I think it was an overheated comparison. You can disagree with what immigration authorities are doing. I certainly disagree with it, at least to some degree. They are not deliberately targeting people for murder, which is what took place at the Holocaust. That was an attempt to vaporize an entire ethnicity. This is the deportation of people who entered the country illegally. Criminals are being sent to some pretty bad conditions, prisons, CCOT, but otherwise the illegal immigrants are being deported to their home countries. This is not, again, I'm not saying I support it, but to just immediately go, oh, this is like what Hitler was doing, weakens the potency of that analogy and cheapens the unique horror of that historical event. So I would definitely be with the Holocaust Museum to just not use that one. Also then, okay, but even Tim Walz doesn't believe it's that serious because he is now negotiating with Trump to do it so they'll just do deportations of some people. That would be like, so he's negotiating with the SS is what he's doing in his metaphor. I don't think he thinks that.
Well, I think some schools were closed and people probably were uncomfortable, and so I think that he's actually leaning on a true feeling, but that doesn't mean you need to relate it to the Holocaust. There are still survivors and descendants of people that were affected by the Holocaust alive right now, and so every time that we continue to use this as a reference, both on the Republican side of the aisle and the Democratic side of the aisle, it's inappropriate. I bring it up when every day we hear fascists from different people calling it out and pointing to each other. I think we can do better, and we can just say this is not how our democracy should look. We should want better. It doesn't take too much courage to say that ICE killing Americans is not the road that we'd like to go down. And I think you can firmly say that. And the rest of his press conference, which I used in my lens earlier this week, was firm and adamant as a leader, but every time you want to bring in and exacerbate and discuss in relation to a new incident, the experience that the Jewish community had, I think that is improper correlation. We can just talk about this moment now, and it might go down in history books about how it was all handled, but it certainly doesn't need to be compared to another moment that was an egregious part of our history. It's like, every time people are like, oh, something slavery, it wasn't as bad as slavery. That doesn't make any sense. So the comparison doesn't make sense. And I think you can say words like, okay, we're taking an authoritarian drift. We need to be careful of our democracy, hold our leaders accountable, look over federal officials, but you don't have to say, this is the Holocaust, Trump is a Nazi. That, like, every time, it's exhausting. It's
set
exhausting.
Up camps to gas millions of people and then burn their remains. Like, this isn't anything on that same level.
Right, but I think that said, when we look at history in 10 years and look back on this moment and see some of the places that people are being held that are considered criminal. We're not sure that every single person there is a criminal, but they're being held in these detention camps. The environments, from what I see on social media, does not look adequate for humanity and humane conditions. And so part of that is we're going to be critical when we look back of like, is this the best job that we could have done with immigration? I think we'll look at the last 10 years and wonder what could have been handled better and how there could have been more bipartisan work with both parties to figure out how to solve this in a different way that treated people humanely. And I think that that's probably what Walz was getting at. And then he just went, too far with the comparison to prove a point. But it is very contentious there. I mean, he's watching American citizens die twice in a month. And so you saw Fry and when he had his press conference cursing everybody out. Like, I think everybody is truly heightened. So that's why I'm happy that they had a conversation, President Trump and Governor Walz, because hopefully we can stop getting on TV with what can be looked at as performance or actual anger, and we can actually get to the root of fixing some of the issues in the state.
Yeah, I hope Democrats are finally ready to participate in that effort, which they haven't been, and which is why this massive federal intervention and crackdown happened. If they would just agree to detain and then hand over illegal immigrants who have been detained because they've committed other crimes, there would be no need for any of this. Well, that's all that was being asked for.
You know what? If the president would have called Walz, like Walz decided to call him yesterday, maybe they could have discussed this before he bombarded the state and the city with federal authorities. The default is be presidential.
It's not the order of events.
No.
They declared it a sanctuary city. They said
when
we
Biden was
will
president,
not
when Biden was
participate with national law enforcement on immigration on any level whatsoever.
And so did Mamdani. And guess what? He had a conversation with President Trump, and they have an amicable relationship. So a conversation is always worth having, I think, before sending the federal forces inside of a state and 2 Americans being killed. You could point fingers all day, but I don't think that's any solution. To say, oh, you made it a sanctuary. Okay, you guys are voted in office. You're not ordained with a crown to lead. So please lead. Pick up the phone. I don't care who started it. This is very childish to say, well, if Democrats would have. No, here we are. You have to solve it now. It is to say, okay, here we are. People died. And so is that the solution that people want?
Republicans are trying to get them to reverse that policy. A policy that was fine, and then they did something, and then they upped it to non-compliance. And this is what non-compliance looks like.
Well, then, you know what? Conversations are the first start. Legislation is the second start. But going in there and just bombarding a state that doesn't want your intervention and then 2 Americans dying within a month is certainly not the outcome that we were looking for. I think you can agree with that.
I do agree with that. We have a lot more to talk about on Rising. Please stay with us.